In 1440, a handwritten Bible took a single monk roughly a year to copy. One book, 12 months of labor. That Bible cost about as much as a house. And if you weren't clergy or royalty, you would never touch one. Information wasn't scarce by accident. It was scarce by design. Then, one machine in one German city broke that design permanently. This is Object Origins, the channel that traces how single objects reshaped civilization. And today's object might be the most dangerous one we've ever covered. Worth saying up front, some dates and figures in this story come from historical estimates that scholars still debate, so I'll stick with what's well documented and flag where things get uncertain. Now, what I want you to understand by the end of this isn't just the history of the printing press. It's why every revolution you've ever studied, religious, political, scientific, traces back to a workshop in Mainz. And there's one specific irony at the center of this story that I think changes how you see all of it. Around 1440, a goldsmith named Johannes Gutenberg was working on something in Mainz that he kept remarkably quiet about. He wasn't a scholar. He wasn't a monk. He was a metal worker. And that mattered more than anyone realized at the time. What Gutenberg understood was casting. He figured out how to cast individual metal letters, movable type, that could be arranged into words, locked into a frame, inked, and pressed onto paper, then disassembled, then rearranged into entirely different pages. The Gutenberg printing press wasn't one invention. It was a system: movable type, oil-based ink, and a press adapted from the ones used to crush grapes for wine. Each piece existed in some form before him, but nobody had combined them into a machine that could reproduce text at scale. Before Gutenberg, producing a single page meant carving it by hand or copying it letter by letter. After Gutenberg, a trained crew could produce hundreds of identical pages in a day. The economics of knowledge inverted overnight. And the first thing he chose to print tells you everything about the world he was living in, and the world he was about to destroy. The Gutenberg Bible, roughly 1455, about 180 copies, some on paper, some on vellum. It was stunning. It was meticulous, and it was a paradox that Gutenberg himself probably never fully grasped. He printed the Bible because that was the market. The church was the institution with money, with demand, with a reason to want copies of sacred text. It made perfect commercial sense. But here's what that decision actually set in motion. For over 1,000 years, the church's authority rested partly on its monopoly over scripture. Priests read, congregations listened. Interpretation flowed one direction, top down. The moment Bibles became affordable enough for merchants and minor nobles to own, that monopoly cracked. People started reading scripture themselves. They started asking questions that had no approved answers. The printing revolution didn't attack the church. It simply made the church's control over information structurally impossible to maintain. And the man who proved it showed up about 60 years later. In 1517, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in Wittenberg. That part of the story everyone knows. What most people underestimate is what happened next. Within weeks, not years, not decades, those theses had been copied, reprinted, and distributed across German-speaking Europe. The Martin Luther printing press connection isn't a footnote in the Reformation, it's the engine. Luther wrote in German, not Latin. Printers saw demand and ran copies. The ideas moved faster than any bishop could respond. Now, could the Reformation have happened without the press? Some historians argue the underlying tensions were already there, and they're right. The tensions were real, but tensions without distribution are just private grievances. The press turned private grievance into public movement, and once that mechanism existed, it never stopped. Pamphlets fueled the English Civil War. Enlightenment thinkers published across borders. When Thomas Paine wrote Common Sense in 1776, roughly 500,000 copies circulated in the colonies, in a population of about 2.5 million. The American Revolution was, in a very literal sense, a printed revolution. So was the French one. Every government that rose to power after Gutenberg tried to control the press. Licensing acts, censorship boards, state-approved publishers. And every single one of those systems eventually failed. Not because rulers were weak, because how printing press changed the world was structural, not political. You can burn a pamphlet. You cannot unprint an idea that already exists in 10,000 copies across 4 countries. So here's where we started. One book, 1 year, the cost of a house. And only the powerful could hold it. Gutenberg didn't invent information. He made it uncontrollable. Every revolution since 1450 became possible because ideas started moving faster than the armies sent to stop them. And if that pattern sounds familiar, a new technology flooding the world with uncontrollable information, governments scrambling to regulate it, nobody quite sure what happens next. It should. We might be living through the second version of the same invention. As with all historical narratives, interpretations here reflect broad scholarly consensus, but history is rarely as clean as a single story suggests. If this one stayed with you, a like helps it reach more people. And if you're not subscribed to Object Origins yet, there's more here that goes deeper into the objects that quietly built the modern world.